First of all, I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee open. I'm in search of a motion for the election of a temporary chairperson. Councillor Addis.
Councillor, could I suggest that Councillor Park chairs the meeting?
Do I have a seconder for that?
You do.
Councillor Park, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other nominations? There being no further nominations, I declare Councillor Park elected as temporary chairperson of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee for this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Park.
Back by popular demand, hey? I might start by seeking a adjournment for 10 minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Sinfield and seconded by Councillor Bigger. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. I will start by seeking a motion to resume, moved by Councillor Sinfield, seconded by Councillor Stavrou. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones be turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if need be, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jim Park and I'm the temporary chairperson for the committee this evening. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated at the horseshoe table to the left, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Nick Stavrou, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, and across the other side of the table we have Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger and Councillor Victor Franco. Officers in attendance tonight, seated behind Councillor Stavrou is the Chief Executive Officer Philip Storer, and seated next to him is Daniel Freer, Director of Places and Spaces. Seated to my immediate left is David Thompson, Manager of Governance and Legal. To his left, Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer. Seated to my right is Scott Walker, the Director of Urban Living. And we also have David Cowan, the Acting Manager of Strategic and Statutory Planning. There are a number of other officers in attendance tonight who will be introduced as they present reports. Essentially, the purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. Councillors are familiar with the reports, which include a summary of the objections received. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I'll then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you are making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please don't repeat what earlier speakers have said, and we ask that you keep your submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please inform the committee why you're opposed and suggest an alternative approach which would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than on matters of history or detail in the officer's report. Note that there's a strict time limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chairperson I reserve the right to vary that time, I seldom do. I'll ask that speakers sit at the end of the horseshoe table, and I will invite those speaking against to speak first, followed by those speaking in favour. At the 2.5 minute mark, I'll make that sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. Apologies, Mr Thompson, we have some apologies.
Through you, Councillor Park, we have apologies for Councillor Thompson and Councillor Watson for this evening.
Thank you. Turning to the agenda, item 1, adoption and confirmation of minutes. There are none to adopt for this meeting. Item 2, declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any such declarations? No? That takes us then to presentation of officer reports. 3.1, 135 Barkers Road, Q, Xavier College Senior Campus. That report will be presented by Daniela Splitgerber, Senior Statutory Planner. Thank you.
Through you, Mr Chair. I present UPDC item 3.1 for the development plan for Xavier College Senior School located at 135 Barkers Road, Kew. This development plan proposes to supersede the approved 2006 master plan. The projects on the 2006 plan have been completed with the exception of the change rooms and spectators shelter to the north of Plunkett Oval to be constructed into the existing embankment. It is noted the change rooms and shelter already have a planning permit, however are included in the new development plan as well, given they are not yet constructed. The campus is located on the northern side of Barkers Road and bound by Charles Street to the east. The campus abuts residential interfaces to the north, and to the west abuts an at-grade car park, a multi-storey building owned and operated by Vic Roads. The site is located within the Neighbourhood Residential Zone Schedule 1 and affected by a development plan overlay and a heritage overlay. The development plan is required because the site is located in the development plan overlay. Pursuant to clause 43041, a permit cannot be granted for any buildings and works on the site until a development plan has been approved. Following an approval of a development plan, separate planning permit applications are required to be lodged for each building. The design of individual buildings will be detailed in any future planning permit application stages, and pursuant to clause 43042 of the planning scheme, any permit granted must be generally in accordance with the approved development plan. The Minister for Planning is the responsible authority for the development of land for an education centre if the estimated cost of development is $3 million or greater. As such, the developments outlined in the proposed development plan will be lodged with Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. The applications will then be referred to Council for review and comment. The college is affected by the Heritage Overlay and is included on the Victorian Heritage Register. Pursuant to clause 43013, no permit is required under the overlay to develop a heritage place which is included in the Victorian Heritage Register. Therefore, any heritage impacts are to be considered by Heritage Victoria rather than Council. It is noted that Council's Heritage Advisor has had the opportunity to review the Year 7 and 8 building component of the project and is supportive of the proposal as it will be sited appropriately adjacent to existing heritage buildings on campus. Public consultation of the development plan has been undertaken and formal notification of the plan to nearby residents and owners was carried out between May and October 2021 on 3 separate occasions due to amended plans. Xavier College also conducted a public drop-in information session on the 25th of May 2021, advising the neighbours of the development plan application. 42 submissions were received. Xavier College is an established educational institution. The location of the school remains unchanged and the grounds are not proposed to expand. The development plan incorporates the new buildings within the existing campus. The plan seeks to address the site's increasing capacity due to the forthcoming closure of the Xavier Cosca Hall campus in Brighton. The development plan includes the following key elements: an increase in staff numbers from 180 to 220, an increase in student numbers from 990 to 1,500, an increase in student boarders from 57 to 100, an increase in car parking spaces from 249 to 350 to 400 spaces during school hours. Please note, to clarify wording on page 5 of the officer's report, the number of parking spaces proposed is a total of 350 to 400 spaces. Construction of a new multi-storey building for Year 7 and 8 students adjacent to the northern boundary between Gellibrand Street and Stanley Street. A new car park under the existing Chapel Oval to accommodate additional car parking requirements. A new multi-storey boarding house in the northwest corner of the college. A new multi-storey teaching and learning building to replace the existing boarding house. Extension of existing sports facilities. A new maintenance building on the western boundary, and widening of the crossover to Barker's Road. With the exception of buses, this will include all right turns out of the site band between 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. and 6 p.m, consistent with 40-kilometre school zones. For point of clarification, the maximum height referring to the learning and teaching building in the officer's report is 15.2 metres. The endorsement of the development plan itself does not provide any authorisation for the proposed buildings and works, and where a planning permit is required, this must be applied for after the development plan has been approved. However, it should be noted that any future planning permit applications will be exempt from notice and appeal rights under the provisions of the development plan overlay. It is considered that the development plan represents an appropriate response to the site and surrounds, and reasonably contemplates the future of the school and is an appropriate site-responsive development proposal. Subject to changes reflected in the proposed conditions, the development plan is considered to provide an acceptable balance between accommodating the school's future development needs while moderating the impact on the surrounding residential area. It is recommended that Council approve the development plan subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. We have 5 speakers tonight, 2 against and 3 in favour. The first speaker is Nicholas Hardy. Could you come forward, please? And Mr Hardy will be followed by Michael Mulcahy, just so that you're ready. Mr Hardy, if you could commence your 3-minute presentation with your name and the suburb in which you reside, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Nick Hardy. I live in Hawthorn. I'm here today to represent the over 100 residents on Barker's Road and to preserve the relevant existing amenities such as parking that we have. I'd like to begin by thanking Xavier College for deleting the intersection. That was the primary goal in our opposition. And I'd like to also just note for clarity that we're strongly supportive of all works that they're doing within the constraints of their school themselves. In fact, we're quite supportive of that. So why am I here today then? The reason I'm here today is that given the nature of the planning scheme and the relevant overlays that are applicable to the school, I would like for it to be noted, rather we would like for it to be noted by the members present tonight in passing any motion that any approved development plan, for absolute clarity, does not include or contain any opportunity to install a signalised intersection or any works to Barker's Road other than the widened crossover that we currently have seen on the plans. I want it to be made very clear that a number of private residents and private people have expended considerable expense and undergone substantial angst in opposing an intersection and other works. In fact, some property owners have put their houses up for sale. And that's it, well under 3 minutes. But that's my request, that if we do pass this motion, that we make it abundantly clear and note that there is no opportunity under the current approved development plan to progress an intersection or any works within Barker's Road.
Thank you. Let me just check before you leave that there's no questions. It doesn't appear so. So thank you for your presentation. If you return to the gallery. And Mr Mulcahy, if you can come forward. And again, if you could commence your presentation with your name and the suburb in which you reside, thanks.
Mulcahy, and I'm a resident of Kew. I'm speaking to you as a representative for the residents of Stratford Avenue who've submitted objections to the Xavier Development Plan during its various editions in 2021. Our concerns now specifically relate to the construction phase of the boarding house, and maintenance complex, which will take place, it seems, from around 2024 onwards. By way of context, Stratford Avenue is located at the northwestern end of the Xavier campus. It is a quiet, narrow and therefore effectively one-way cul-de-sac which runs from Wellington Street through to Xavier's Gate 8 and the current tennis courts. Our residents were pleased when the school removed its plans to construct an interim car park on these same tennis courts after it was acknowledged that the narrow and one-way nature of our street would make this a very unworkable and dangerous proposition for residents and students alike. Ironically, however, our remaining concern again relates to Xavier's plans to use Stratford Avenue, this time for heavy vehicles associated with construction of the boarding house and maintenance complex, despite the fact that Xavier has already conceded that the features of our street make it unsuitable for additional traffic flow. We note that during the construction phase of these buildings, our street will be used by large trucks and heavy vehicles as a thoroughfare to deliver materials, and this same point is highlighted on page 71 of the Planning Officer's report, where it states, quote, that the proportion of heavy vehicles associated with the site utilising Stratford Avenue is anticipated to increase. As residents, we are extremely concerned that such vehicles will create congestion and impede traffic flow. This will detrimentally affect access and egress to residents' properties, impact on the amenity of the street, and again create a dangerous situation for students and residents. When we have raised this point about the movement of large trucks in our previous objections, we suggested that the option of utilising the Vic Roads car park should be considered. This suggestion is noted on page 90 of the report, but unlike most other objections, there are unfortunately no planners' comments addressing this one. The Vic Roads Road and car park, which runs off Barkers Road along the adjacent western boundary of the school, has been virtually empty for 2 years since the advent of COVID. Since the final lockdown finished a month or two back, the car park has shown no signs of reuse, and with the option of working from home now appearing to be a reality for most Vic Roads employees, it seems unlikely that it will ever be used as it was previously. I believe it has the potential to hold 200 plus cars, but there were 3 there when I counted last Friday. This access point from Barkers Road via Vic Roads would clearly make a much more suitable option for the delivery of all potential building requirements. The Vic Roads Road and car park finish directly outside the tennis courts where the construction is to take place. If, say, the 20 car spaces adjacent to the courts were set aside for access to the building site, it would seem to be a very sensible decision, as no residents or pedestrians would be affected. The entire width of this strip of land is perhaps 4 or 5 times wider than Stratford Avenue and would make access and egress much easier and safer, especially as trucks could then turn left to leave the site via Denmark Street. We have been advised that this land is owned or managed by the City of Boroondara and leased to Vic Roads, so surely negotiations between the council, Vic Roads and the school could be undertaken to take advantage of this very realistic and more effective solution. In conclusion, we kindly request that the option of utilising the Vic Roads car park be actively pursued as a much more suitable choice during the construction phase of these buildings, and that Stratford Avenue residents be spared this clearly negative consequence of Xavier's expansion. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. It doesn't appear that there's any questions from councillors, so if you could return to the gallery, please.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is William Doherty from Xavier. If you could come forward, please. And Mr. Doherty, if you can start your presentation with your name and your relationship to the matter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm William Doherty. I'm the principal of Xavier College. I'm a resident of Hawthorn. Good evening, Chair and councillors. As you've heard, I'm joined this evening by fellow representatives from the College Board, the College Executive, to note Geraldine Farrell, who's Chair of our Property and Planning Committee, and member of the College Board, the Director of the Senior Campus, the Director of our Burke Hall Campus, Director of Community Engagements, Shane Healy, and John Lincoln, our College Development Manager. 150 years we turn in 2028, and I'm certainly humbled to be part of a college that is a long-term resident of Kew. As has been noted by the officer, we have restructured our college, and the Cosca Hall campus in Brighton closed at the end of this year, which was very significant and humbling for the college. but it has come as a result of our requirement to move on to 2 campuses and to align the college in a fashion more resembling a typical school of prep to year 6 and year 7 to year 12, hence our restructured proposal. This is, as I said, a very conventional split for schooling. Importantly, through the process, the transition for the college, we have liaised extensively with our students, our staff and parents of the college, and then especially the neighbours and those who we share a common interest in Kew. Those consultation sessions have given various advertising notices and drop-in sessions, and we felt that was important. We also felt it was important to listen deeply and to take action where we felt that was warranted. You listen to reflect and make change. One of the important changes that we've made is that resolution around on-site parking. That will deliver a significant boost and a reduction in impact on our local neighbours, particularly though it comes at some cost to the college. We note that the preference would have been to split our projects as a year 7 and 8 project and then separately a car park or transport hub. But despite cash flow matters for the college, we felt it was important to be able to respond to the community, and the college has committed now to undertake both of these elements simultaneously so as to be able to provide that parking in timely fashion and a reduction of impact. We are conscious of our child safety environments, and in this changing world it will always remain a priority to the college. And therefore the improvements that we are making to aspects of our design and accessibility, whilst we love to be able to engage with our neighbours, they remain important that we can set a college up to do justice to the protection and education of our students. And so it's with great gratitude that we're here, and I thank the councillors, the officers who have prepared their reports, and our general community for their participation in our process. And I believe that in the combination of our efforts, we'll have a plan to look after Xavier well into the future generations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and I'll just see if there's any questions. There's one from Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Doherty, for presenting to us tonight. I'm curious to just follow on from a point that was raised by the previous speaker in relation to the use of Stratford Avenue and the opportunity to engage with Vic Roads, and if in fact it is land owned by the City of Boroondara, which I'm unaware of, and perhaps leased to Vic Roads. But is that something that you've considered or will consider to reduce the impact to Stratford Avenue residents?
Yeah, I think we're open to all consideration. I might let also my further speaker speak more directly to that with the Transport and Planning Authority, but the college will always remain open to considerations.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I think my question might be better directed to the next speaker as well. Thank you.
Okay, that appears to have exhausted questions, so thank you for your presentation. And our next speaker is Anna Barclay from Urbis. Ms Barclay, if you know the procedure.
I do. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. My name's Anna Barclay. I'm a town planning consultant from Urbis, and we're based in Melbourne.
I'll just get you to drag that mic a little bit closer. Great.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. As Bill mentioned, the college has made the commitment to prioritise the new underground car park to accommodate students and staff moving from the Brighton campus this evening, and will also provide a dedicated drop-off and pick-up area. So the college has worked quite hard in response to some of the concerns you've heard about this evening. The approach to heritage, landscaping and ESD has also been very carefully considered by MGS architects and throughout consultation with Heritage Victoria. The development plan presents a high-quality master plan to guide future planning permits on the site. Over 300 property owners were notified, both formally through the council process on multiple occasions and directly by the college, as well as being invited to a drop-in session, as you've heard this evening. As Bill mentioned, the college has listened to feedback, and the most significant changes have been the removal of the interim car park, which was to be accessed from Stratford Avenue, bringing forward the Chapel Oval underground car park, as I mentioned, and removing the signalised intersection from Barkers Road. Built form changes were also made to reduce the size and height of the Year 7 and 8 building in response to urban design comments and community feedback. In regard to some of the items that were raised by previous speakers, The traffic signals have already been removed from the development plan, so the development plan now simply states that there will be a widened crossover to Barkers Road. Any future proposal to have signals would require the college to go through this process again. So it would require an amendment to the development plan or a new development plan and further approval from both council and the Department of Transport. In regards to the concerns raised in Stratford Avenue, the existing car park that's currently accessed via this street will be removed and access will be limited to maintenance vehicles only. These maintenance vehicles are associated with the proposed maintenance building, so that's typically utes and small vans for maintenance staff. At this stage, in terms of construction management, that will be dealt with at a planning permit stage. The building hasn't been designed yet. And so that construction management plan that would form part of a planning permit condition would be dealt with at that time. And that will include, as Bill mentioned, exploration of all available sites such as the Vic Road site and consultation with Council's Traffic Department. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. That's all I wanted to say this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Goltz.
Thank you, Chair. To do with the drop-off spots, how many drop-off spots have you got, and could you describe the configuration? In other words, are they flow-through or are they nose in and back out?
I don't have that level of detail. That'll come with the permit stage, but it is through the basement. So the new underground car park, it will be accessed from Barkers Road and you'll be able to drive in and then drive back, turn around within the basement car park and drive back out through Barkers Road. And David Trotter from Traffics, who's speaking after me as the traffic engineer, may have some more answers, but in terms of the development plan, that level of detail in terms of the arrangement of car spaces and the like isn't part of this development plan. Will come at the permit stage, but the intention is to be able to turn around and exit from and enter from Barkers Road.
That seems to have exhausted questions, so thank you, Ms Barclay. And Mr Trotter, if you'd like to come forward. And if you could commence your presentation with your name and your role, thanks.
David Trotter, Traffic Engineer with Traffics Group, who are based in Melbourne. The development plan proposes 3 changes to vehicle access to the college. Firstly, the Barkers Road access is to be widened to allow for the physical separation of entering and exiting motorists. Secondly, right turn exiting traffic onto Barkers Road, other than buses, will be banned on weekdays between 8 and 9:30 a.m. in the morning and 2:30 to 6 in the afternoon. Thirdly, both Stratford Avenue and Gellibrand Street are to be limited to service vehicles only. Our traffic modelling of Barkers Road indicates that the peak hour delay to motorists, both entering and exiting the college, will remain generally consistent with existing conditions. Our traffic modelling of the Charles Street and Hanson Street intersection indicates that this will also operate within acceptable traffic engineering limits, a view which is shared by Council's traffic engineers. Overall traffic volumes within Stratford Avenue are to be generally consistent with existing conditions, noting that the proportion of service vehicles accessing the college via Stratford Avenue will increase. Following the removal of vehicle access for staff and parents to Gellibrand Street, there will be significant reductions to traffic volumes on Gellibrand Street. The proposal has a Burundara planning scheme requirement to provide at least 36 additional on-site car parks. The proposal includes at least 37 additional car parks outside of school hours and at least 106 additional car parking spaces during school hours, comparative to current requirements. The proposed provision of car parking exceeds Burundara planning scheme requirements, with the majority of car parking to be consolidated within a new car park underneath the Chapel Oval, which is also proposed to contain a dedicated pick-up and drop-off facility for students. In determining the future transport design of the site, 3 key strategies were identified. Firstly, to connect the campus with a clear and accessible pedestrian spine. Secondly, to prioritise pedestrians. And thirdly, to separate people from cars. We firmly believe that our transport plan for the college achieves these strategies and has been supported by both the Head of Transport, being Vic Roads, and Council's traffic engineers. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Mr Trotter, I'm just wondering if you could clarify for me, please. You said that the increase in parking was above the current requirements. Is that different to, in addition to the current state? Do your current provisions already exceed the current requirements?
Yes, that's correct. So
what's the net gain?
The net gain of spaces, so there's two elements of that. The first one, and the numbers I mentioned, are relative to the approved development plan. I can get the other numbers for you, but I would say that they are very close, within 10 or so car parking spaces. Since the 2006 development plan, there has been some changes to car parking configuration in the college. So I'd say the numbers are very much in that order. And if you'd like, I can get those specific numbers for you.
2 officers would be fine. Thank you.
Yep.
There's also a question from Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you've anything to add to the response from the previous speaker regarding the configuration of the drop-off spaces. Is it too early to feed that to us? I am particularly interested in is it a flow-through type arrangement possible?
Yes, absolutely. So as Anna from Urbis elaborated upon earlier, obviously that will be dealt at the planning permit phase, but in order to develop the development plan, there were some preliminary plans that were prepared in order to provide certainty that the provision could be accommodated and costing arrangements and the like. And certainly the preliminary design did envisage essentially a one-way loop around the car park. Essentially there would be a one-way loop around the car park, predominantly incorporating probably in the order of 20 or so parallel bays. They would be seen as, I guess, the high frequency or high drop-off bays. And if you can sort of imagine, if this loop encases the car park, within that loop there would be what I would call standard or typical 90-degree angled car parking that could obviously be used for pick-up and drop-off, staff parking and other uses as well.
If I might ask a couple more questions. We've talked a couple of times about Stratford, and I'd like to look a little bit further at the sort of predicted increases in traffic, both that you're currently anticipating, both during construction and post-construction. There is some increase anticipated, the type and numbers, if you could.
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, with respect to construction, as previous speakers have noted, obviously there would be a planning permit condition that would require the preparation of a construction management plan. That would also require the preparation typically of a construction traffic management plan that would detail vehicle access to the site, as well as truck volumes, length of duration, operating hours and similar. Certainly at this stage, there hasn't been significant discussions around how that would occur. The building's still to be designed, the constructor's still to be appointed, matters of that nature. I would probably just reaffirm, though, that certainly any options wouldn't be off the table, and I'm sure there are a myriad of different options in terms of access. In terms of post-development, so there's currently a 15-space, give or take, car park that is currently accessible via Stratford Avenue. We did not complete surveys of this car park. It's our understanding, though, that this is not highly utilised, at least for pick-up and drop-off during those key school hours. So there may be some reduction in traffic, obviously, associated with the removal of that car park. In terms of the addition of traffic, as highlighted earlier, predominantly this will occur via utes, vans or things of that nature. It will vary day to day depending on the operations of the school, but in broad terms we've been advised that this would roughly equate to in the order of 5 to 10 vehicles per day. But again, I would expect that would fluctuate throughout the week.
Just one final question, if I may. There was some discussion earlier about Barkers Road and the removal of the lights, which I think we're all very pleased about. There still will be quite a number of right turns in at both morning and afternoon peaks for pick-up and drop-off, I would think. Do you anticipate, or have you looked at with Vic Roads, the need to change the parking arrangements, particularly on the south side of Barkers Road? In other words, will you require, for the volumes anticipated, to increase the parking restrictions along Barkers Road?
So as part of the development plan, we're not proposing any amendments to car parking restrictions along Barkers Road. We've prepared a traffic model on that basis that assumes parking restrictions are retained as per existing conditions, including the current clearway conditions. That traffic model suggests that from a purely traffic engineering perspective, that there wouldn't be a requirement to modify the car parking restrictions or the number of spaces that are restricted along Barkers Road.
Thank you.
And I have a question from Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Mr Trotter. Just with regard to Stratford Avenue again, I know you've talked about the construction management plan and the planning permit in terms are still to be finalised. Have you had conversations with the possibility of avoiding Stratford Avenue and what an alternate access may be?
May I just clarify, does that relate to post-development or are we talking during the construction?
During the construction. Yeah.
No, we've not really had any discussions regarding the construction phase at this time.
All right, look, thank you. I might save my question for officers later. Thank you.
Councillor Gold.
Just want to foreshadow a motion, Chair.
Sure. Okay, Mr Trotter, that seems to have exhausted all the questions, so thank you, and you can return to the gallery. And Ms Split-Gerber for matters arising.
Thank you. To address the submissions made earlier, with regard to the Vic Roads car park, it is noted that it is owned by the Victorian State Government and not council managed land, and any future development and use of the abutting Vic Roads site is currently unknown. However, the development plan has included a potential link with the school and Vic Roads to allow future connection of the site to be explored. It is noted that with regard to the signalised intersection, that the Head of Transport opposes the signalised intersection at Barkers Road, and as such it has been removed from the development plan as well. Any future proposals are subject to approval by the Department of Transport. With regard to the Stratford Avenue, it is acknowledged that it is a narrow street and it will only be used for service vehicles only. The proportion of heavy vehicles does refer to small utes and vans for maintenance purposes only and anticipated to be infrequent use during the day. Given only maintenance vehicles will be accessing via Stratford Street, it is anticipated traffic volumes will be infrequent and not exceed beyond existing conditions and therefore are considered acceptable and have been assessed by Council's traffic engineers, which concur with this assessment in that traffic will not be further impacted. As such, with regards to the construction process, a construction management plan would appropriately manage the vehicle movement, controlling vehicles in and out of the site during construction, and these details would be required at the planning permit stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there questions of officers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Ms Split-Gerber, I just wanted to ask, looking at an aerial map at the moment off Wellington Street, where you turn left onto Stratford Avenue and then directly beside that is a service road to access, I presume, the Vic Roads car park and beyond. I'm trying to determine if that actual service road linking to the car park, is that a council asset? And I can appreciate it might be difficult, but while you're looking at that, what I wanted to ask was if it is a council asset, could that service road be utilised just during the course of construction? Because I can appreciate a project the volume of the size of what's before us here would cause a huge impost on the residents of Stratford Avenue for probably a 2-year period. And just wanted to ask if it could be possible to utilise that access road beside, because that will then come...
We've got the question.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, though, it actually then does go right through to the tennis court area, which would be the access point. Thank you.
Just to confirm that it is not part of the managed by Burundara, so it is part of the Vic Road state government land.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I'm wondering if officers have considered the need to possibly change the parking requirements restrictions on the south side of Barkers Road, directly opposite the access and egress point to the campus, so that if there was a bank up of right turners, city-bound right turners into the campus, there would be the ability for other vehicles to pass. If there was a no standing zone there, if there were parked vehicles, it would obviously be very difficult for city-bound traffic to pass.
Thanks for that question. So the south side of Barkers Road is currently a clearway within 20 to 30 metres of the access point to Barkers Road. So there is no parking availability there.
Sorry, is that at all times?
It's a clearway in the morning between 6:30 and 9:30, yes.
In afternoon school pickup time, is there a clearway there?
During the afternoon, no. No, there isn't.
So my question still remains, have officers considered the need to possibly restrict parking there in the afternoons to enable vehicles to go around any banked up right-turning traffic into the site?
Council's traffic engineers have assessed the traffic report submitted and an assessment of the area and considered that is not necessary as the road network can accommodate the traffic.
Did officers actually specifically address that point in their report?
I don't believe it's been specifically addressed.
Could it be addressed? Because I'm not satisfied that that this won't cause a problem to city-bound traffic in the afternoon if there is a bank up of hundreds of additional parents coming to pick up on campus and the inability for city-bound traffic to pass on a major arterial.
Yes, it can certainly be addressed and we can take that on notice with our traffic engineers as well.
Thank you, and I've got a second question, if I may, Chair. Just in relation to the question that I asked earlier of Mr Trotter, the increase in parking on site, were officers aware that the increase that was discussed earlier or alluded to is in addition to the current requirements, not the current provision on site?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The college appears to provide in excess of the current requirement. The number of additional car parking spaces provided is on top of the provision, not on top of the current status quo, as I understand it. So what is perceived as a net increase is actually substantially less because they're already providing in addition to the current requirement. Was that made clear to officers?
So the car parking requirement meets the statutory rate and they are providing in excess of that. It is, the car parking provided is to accommodate the reconfiguration per se of current car parking on site and accommodate the extra car parking.
Thanks. It doesn't answer my question, but I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
I have Councillor Galt next, but I just going back to Councillor Sinfield's first question, how does that best get addressed tonight? Ought it be some sort of a notation? I don't know if Mr Storer can give some advice or...
Thanks, through yourself, Chair. That certainly is something that we can take up with the transport team. Often when developments proceed, there are consequences or impacts on the traffic network, and adjustments sometimes need to be made from time to time to respond to the impacts that occur, and that would include car parking restrictions and adjustments to other sorts of controls in and around surrounding streets. So this is one of those sorts of matters that can be followed up with the transport team and reviewed based on the circumstances of what's been proposed.
Councillor Bigger?
Yeah, I know I'm jumping the queue here, but my question is really a follow-up also on that first question with Councillor Sinfield, and I just have a slight concern, and I guess my question is whether or not I know that residents of Barkers Road were particularly concerned about any parking restrictions or any change to parking. So if it was determined, for instance, that there was a need for a parking clearway in the afternoon, did they express, were the residents able to comment on that as a possible outcome? And was there concern, was there objection about that? Do I need to rephrase that question? It's whether or not...
I think that's clear.
It's whether or not residents would express concern about a clearway on Barkers Road at any time, for instance, in the afternoon, and whether we're not allowing them the opportunity to comment on that if we do make such a change.
Through yourself, Chair, we're not aware of the specific issues around parking on Barkers Road being raised by the submissions. If there were to be adjustments to parking, that's something that would be undertaken as part of consultation, further consultation with residents that are affected by those changes.
So I guess one of the questions that arises from that is at what point would councillors hear back in respect of where this has all landed? Mr. Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wanting to, I guess, ask if I could, this is going to be unusual, just ask the team up the front there to indicate whether this application was referred to our traffic engineers and whether they raised concerns about the impacts on Barkers Road. And if they didn't, one would assume they didn't have any. If they did, then what is the remedy? Because I think what councils are struggling with is whether or not this ought to be approved in the first place as a consequence of the impacts they perceive might arise. So I guess I'm just wanting to understand what our traffic engineers actually said about this very question, if anything. And it may well be that if enough councillors are concerned about this and we can't provide responses tonight, then the only solution is to defer consideration so that the responses can be provided to give that assurance.
Thanks. Through yourself, Chair, if I can just perhaps reconfirm, and I think there was some reference made earlier to the application or proposal being referred to Council's traffic and transport engineers. And that would have included and did include the traffic assessments that have been undertaken on behalf of the applicant being referred to the traffic engineers. So the entire proposal with the advice and information provided by the proponents' traffic engineers was reviewed. There were no concerns raised by Council's traffic and transport team in regard to the movements and impact on the traffic network of the proposal. So the assessment undertaken by Council's traffic engineers is saying, based on the information included, what's being proposed, that there is no concerns and there is no need for changes in regard to parking restrictions in Barkers Road or other streets. Now, perhaps the comment that I'd made earlier in referencing this would be something that can be looked at later is in reference to the modelling that occurs with traffic assessments looks at the situation as anticipated and what's proposed. And there is always an obligation on Council to reflect on changes that do actually take place and what actually does occur at future points in time to see whether there is concern that needs adjustments. And perhaps that's the reference that I was making about that's something that can be looked at a future point in time if there was a consequence that was different to what was anticipated when the proposal is implemented. But based on the review and assessment, there is not expected to be an impact on the traffic network of the proposal.
Councillor Sinfield, do you, before I move to Councillor Galt, do you want to ask anything further in respect of that, or are you
I would just like to explicitly ask, this proposal in its entirety has been reviewed by Mr Hondrakis and his team?
That's correct.
All right. Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. Could I simply return to the issue of a lighted intersection in Barkers Road? And thank you for clarifying that needs to be a decision of Vic Roads. But can I seek from you some assurance that if a proposal is made in the future and Vic Roads do consider it, that Council will have an opportunity to consider it again at that time? It won't simply be a Vic Roads decision, not brought before this Council.
Again, through yourself, Chair, there are two components. One would be an amendment to the development plan, and that would come back before this Council. The second component would be a referral and comment and advice from Vic Roads, or the Head of Transport as it's now referred to. So there are the two components, and a tick's needed under both components before that sort of change could take place.
I think Councillor Stavro is next.
Thank you, through you, Chair. My question relates to the trees. I understand about 32 trees will be cut and over 100 would be replanted. My question is, who checks on the ongoing health of the planted trees that they actually grow to full canopy size?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of tree maintenance, part of the planning permit stage will require a tree management plan and a landscape plan, and that requires maintenance options as well. So that would maintain the ongoing viability of the trees that are to be retained and protected on site.
So I guess my question is, on an ongoing manner, how do we know if we approve something that it will actually get done? That's the question.
That's probably a broader policy question for you, Mr Walker.
Thanks, through yourself, Chair. This perhaps is similar to a question that was raised in relation to a planning permit at the UPDC meeting last week. A standard condition that will go on to planning permits relates to the implementation of the landscaping, and that landscaping will need to be in accordance with the plans or landscape plans approved under the planning permit. The second component is a maintenance condition to ensure that the landscaping is maintained in accordance with that plan, and that gives then an ability to and an expectation that any planting that's died or is not maintained in accordance with that plan is replaced and it needs to be maintained. So there's the two components that will go on a standard conditions as part of a planning permit issued. In this case, that planning permit actually sits subsequent to what is being approved here, which is your overall master plan that gives some guidance and expectations for that landscaping. So we're layering through the detail in the planning layers in this case, and then ensuring that the plans are implemented through the specific conditions.
Councillor Beggar.
Yes. So this is the first time that I've been involved, I think, in the endorsement of a development plan, and I'm just trying to, I have a clarification question. So my understanding is that obviously that there would be in future the need for planning permits for the different aspects of the work. But it does say that these future planning permits would be exempt from notice and appeal rights. That's correct, and that's a state government requirement, not a city requirement or expectation. Is that correct?
Again, through yourself, Chair, the development plan overlay that's been put in place for this site has been put there to support the development of future planning for institutions such as schools. So this is pretty common and pretty typical that these sorts of development plan requirements are put in place for these sorts of institutions. And what it's to avoid the need for is for each proposal that's brought forward by a school, and often schools are doing different projects throughout the year and over years, each of those going through a public notification process. So you could imagine 3 or 4 proposals going through that full public notification process. So it's one, so that the community understands the full picture of what's happening over a period of time on the site, and that the full public input occurs at that stage, and that's what this development plan sits there for. So it sits there as that overall plan. But what that means is that then the subsequent planning permits do not go through that public notice process, assuming or on the basis that it's in accordance with that overall plan. Now, that's the model that's set up by the state government requirements under the development plan overlay.
And so, in terms of what you just said, that's an assumption that it was in accordance with the overall development plan. Who determines whether or not it is in accordance? Do we have the opportunity as the council to determine whether or not it's in accordance with that development plan? Yeah.
Again, through yourself, Chair, that's a matter of fact, but we won't have the direct control over the planning permits in many cases if it's over the $3 million trigger, given the change to the planning scheme. Historically, council would have had control over all of those permits. Having said that, council will get the opportunity to comment on those when they're considered by the Department of Planning, because council will receive the referral and will provide comment on that. And it's a matter of fact that it must be in accordance with the development plan. So there's always an avenue of pursuing an argument that it's not in accordance with that plan if it was to be done so outside of that process.
Chair, could I have one follow-on? Thank you. So then, at the risk of flogging this dead horse on the Barkers Road, were there to be, as you suggested a minute ago, an amendment to the development plan, for instance, involving potential clearway on Barkers Road, would that include notice and appeal rights? Do all amendments to development plans include those? Is that a clear question? Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Through yourself, Chair, just seeking some clarification there. If it was a minor change to the development plan, then formal notice would not be required. That would be for minor changes to development plan. So again, it would be that trigger around is there detriment or potential detriment of the change to the development plan. So minor changes could occur to the development plan without going through that full process, just like any planning permit or amendment to a planning permit would meet those sorts of triggers as well. Having said that, there is perhaps an area or a grey area around changes to parking on a main road or on surrounding streets, because that's not formally covered by the development plan. The development plan is relating to the site and is not necessarily covering the surrounding road network, which makes that perhaps that little bit of a grey area in that there is reference to the impact on the surrounding road network that's a consequence of the development on the site. Now, that's often what happens with planning permits or planning approvals, that there is a relationship between that development occurring and what's happening on the surrounding road network, but there is then a situation where there might be changes on a road network that occur that are independently decided that are not covered by that development plan.
I'm sorry, but just again, just to clarify, then does that mean that any decisions that were, because there's been reference by several of our questioners, for instance, tonight, about the residents saying they wanted a commitment about Barkers Road, and I think Xavier saying that they were, committed to hearing this. But in fact, it sounds like from what you've just said that decisions that we're making tonight are actually not regarding what will or won't be done on Barkers Road are actually not indicative of what may or may not happen in the next few years. Is that correct? I'm sorry if I'm being difficult. I'm just really trying to understand this.
No, I don't think you're being difficult. I think it's important that councillors actually understand, and I think while officers contemplate that, the Councillor Galt has foreshadowed a motion, and we don't yet know what that is, but of course, if there are enough councillors concerned about the answers to the traffic concerns, then the next meeting of the EPC is the 7th of February, so there would be the opportunity to defer consideration to that meeting. So I don't know what, we might just understand what Councillor Galt's intending to move.
If you're happy for me to comment on that, I was satisfied that the process with regard to the overall plan had been gone through and I was satisfied, but I do agree that there's questions around Barkers Road and the treatment of parking during the afternoon peak. I don't think that's been satisfactorily addressed or answered. Adding to that, I did put that question in writing earlier today, and I don't believe that was answered either. So, we could either move forward conditional upon that being satisfactorily answered, because it is not the first time this has happened. It must happen at MLC and a number of other sites along Barkers Road. Alternatively, we could hold approval until that's resolved through the officers and back to council again.
Mr. Walker.
Can I just perhaps make a further comment, and it perhaps maybe doesn't get you to the point that
we might just start with Councillor Bigger's answer first, if you're in a position to.
Yep. I don't believe that the development plan and what we include in the development plan can control future changes that might take place or might be decided in relation to parking in surrounding streets. So the development plan itself, I don't believe, could prevent that. There might be a whole range of reasons or changes or things that occur that might mean that the council seeks to review parking in surrounding streets into the future. So there might be other changes that happen in Barkers Road as a result of increase in traffic or other developments nearby that change the parking relationship in the street. Now that is a decision at a future point in time that the council could make and will need to make in relation to parking. It's something that council does. It manages parking in surrounding streets. I don't believe that the development plan on a particular site can control those future circumstances and purport to control those future circumstances that might be impacted by other things. Yes, it might be a consequence of some of the change to this particular site and the behaviour that drivers undertake. So if the question is, would this be something that would trigger a re-review of the development plan into the future, the answer is not necessarily no, because council will need to make decisions around parking management into the future for a whole bunch of reasons, and this could be one of those.
Mr. Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wanting to clarify. It seems to me the concern being raised by councillors is whether or not the development plan approval is in fact going to result in an unacceptable outcome on Barkers Road. So it's not so much whether the development plan can control what happens in Barkers Road, but whether or not approval is going to produce an unacceptable outcome there. So I guess I just want to ask the team to comment specifically on that. And if you're not in the position to comment on that, it would seem to me there's a question there which councillors would need to have answered to be able to make a decision. So perhaps if that could be addressed quite specifically, that is, Will approval of the development plan, in our view, result in an unacceptable outcome on Barkers Road?
Thanks again, through yourself, Chair. The Head of Transport, Vic Rhodes, has reviewed the proposal and has not raised any concern with the impact on Barkers Road. And that includes taking into account the parking restrictions that currently apply, that is the morning clearway zone and the afternoon being no clearway heading city-bound. So the Head of Transport, Vic Rhodes, who has responsibility for main roads and in particular Barkers Road, has not raised concern and does not have concern with the proposal. So that's quite clear. As I say as well, the matter has been referred to Council's Transport and Traffic team and no concerns have been raised there either.
All right. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I wonder whether you might afford me a comment rather than a question at this point.
As long as it's brief,
My concern is that the guidance that's been provided, I feel, is short-sighted rather than the large strategic overview of this site, and I don't think that it is unreasonable to think that there will be flow-on effects for Barkers Road and Barkers Road residents and visitors to their property. So for Mr Walker to say that we can review things subsequent to the development if there are problems doesn't satisfy me that we're doing our job sufficiently at this point. I think we need to look at the very likely flow-on effects now rather than in a couple of years down the track when we get complaints about parking and congestion on Barkers Road. So hundreds of vehicles accessing and egressing the site is not unforeseen.
I wonder, from Xavier's perspective, if there's any time criticality. If we don't deal with this tonight, it would come to us on the 7th of February. Is the headmaster still present? I'm not sure if he's in a position, and if, with your indulgence, councillors, but would you be in a position to just, in short compass, answer that for me?
Certainly. Yeah, we are in a time-critical position to enable us to achieve the educational imperatives that we're seeking to be able to achieve by 2024. It is time-critical.
So what we'd be talking about in this scenario, if it's not resolved tonight, we'd be dealing with it on the 7th of February. Would that?
No, that wouldn't be. In a matter of our good governance as well, we have to seek our own financial approvals and planning approvals through the Society of Jesus that goes all the way through to Rome, and that is on a critical path.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
So, are there any more questions? If not, then what I'd propose to do is hand back to Councillor Galt. I mean, I still have concerns personally about this, but I think at the end of the day, a call needs to be made. So, Councillor Galt, it's whichever way you proceed, either that it will succeed or it'll fail, and then it'll be obvious what's going to happen. So, over to you.
Balancing up the issues we've discussed this evening, I would be prepared to go with the officer's recommendations with one additional clause at the end, that immediately we also pursue more details on the effects in Barker's Road of the increased use of that larger entry-exit from the campus.
Let's put that up and see if it's captured your intent before I seek a seconder.
And if I could just maybe add that we attempt to resolve any issues arising from that with Vic Roads.
Let's say Vic Roads. Let's say.
I don't think it's going to be a major issue with Vic Roads.
Yeah.
Because it happens now. It happens at MLC now with 2,000
So
students.
let's say Vic Roads has been comfortable.
Yeah.
What do we do? We do nothing.
We've got nothing. That's the authority we're going to be referring to anyway.
Put in there, and let's say Vic Roads. It is what it is. We don't like it. What do we do then?
There would be restricted parking around there anyway, I would think.
We will change the parking.
I don't think we're going to change the parking. That what we'll have to advise the residents that we're going to do that.
But it's Vic Roads, right? We can't do it here.
Well, that's right. We said we can't do it.
So let's say that we don't like the traffic outcome. Vic Roads says we're okay.
We can be difficult on the detailed planning approvals. You're right, it does create a problem.
Yeah, look, let's put that up and see. So, Councillor Galt, we'll just see if that reflects what you had in mind. There we go. Councillor Galton, councillors, if you can just have a look at that, firstly, before I take any further.
Chair, with your indulgence, I seek a question before the motion is put.
All right, I'll allow that.
Thank you. I'm just trying to decipher page 49 of the papers that we have in front of me, and I'm just seeking clarification with the outbound lanes from the campus, or the college. If there was a bus outbound waiting to turn right onto Barker's Road, and I note that buses are exempt from the no right turn in the AM, the PM, in fact, at all times, are vehicles other than buses able to turn left at the same time? Is it sufficiently wide at that crossover for a bus to be waiting to turn right and vehicles to turn left simultaneously, assuming they had visibility to do so safely? But I can't decipher that on page 49.
That's with reference to the swept path analysis.
Yes.
So is there an officer here who actually can comment on that? Mr. Hondrakis was here, but he's no longer here, is he? No. Mr. Storer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just wanted to advise the applicant has just advised me through their planning consultant they are comfortable with what's up there. They've already done some work on this and they're very comfortable with item 2 being incorporated in the decision council makes.
Thank you. So, who's the lucky officer to respond to Councillor Sinfield's question?
To respond to your question, it is only a single lane, and the traffic assessment has concluded that even if there is a bus waiting to turn out of the Barkers Road exit, that the internal road network can accommodate the traffic waiting to turn.
Thank you.
Councillor Biggar.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that, number 2, and trying to understand what exactly, what will be done with that information, what that will mean, because we haven't clarified. We're going to get information, but then we've got to be saying something about that information some question that it answers, right? Because for me, that's just very vague right now.
I think what you say is probably true. You would need to read it in conjunction with the very first paragraph at the top.
Yes.
But
so
it still probably needs a little bit of tightening, and that's really down to Councillor Galt to tell us whether that has captured his intent or not. Although I think for me and probably for others, I think there still remains the bigger question of whether this can actually be dealt with tonight, given the information before us. But Councillor Galt, do you have anything more to offer on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think it needs an action statement added to it because the outcome is not clear from that point 2. I think what we're aiming at by adding the additional information is to resolve the issues with regards to access during the afternoon peak, and that it will not detrimentally affect adjoining residents.
Mr. Storer.
Yes, Mr Chairman, so just to be clear, what the staff would do with this is that when you read the preamble, essentially the information below needs to be provided to the satisfaction of the staff as part of the final endorsement, and therefore the staff would not be providing that endorsement unless the information in item 2 was provided to our satisfaction. What we've heard already tonight is that the body responsible for the road has said it actually has no concerns with the proposal. So essentially really the bit that's perhaps seeking further clarification here is the specifics around the Traffic and Transport Department's comments in relation to the issues which are being raised. But we would look at this and say, well, unless we're satisfied, we can't actually endorse the plan, in which case it would come back here for a decision. So essentially what you're doing is saying to the staff, we're entrusting you to satisfy yourselves that the concerns being raised by councillors have been adequately addressed. That's essentially what the implications of that would be.
All right, thank you. So look, I think Councillor Galt needs to just consider whether, in view of that, the motion it needs any further tweaking before it's seconded. But just I'll allow one final opportunity in an endeavour to see where we get to. Are there any further questions that have arisen for councillors, given the what's transpired? Councillor Franco.
Look, for me, this additional motion doesn't sit in. I'm probably flagging discussion, but I can't support the second motion. I don't think it's relevant. I think it could be dealt with in general business if there's a need for a separate discussion about traffic movements there, but I don't think it's relevant to the motion. I think it confuses the matter, and I just can't say
all right, that's probably more debate, but yep. So there don't seem to be any questions. So back to you, Councillor Galt.
I think we're nearly there, and I think the issue of not adversely affecting the adjoining residents is still outstanding. So subject to the satisfaction of the responsibility, to the responsible authority, that the interests of the adjoining residents will not be adversely affected. If we can add that, I think we've covered the point. It's a bit long-winded, my apologies, but... Put that through.
Can I suggest the word unacceptably in there? Because they will be adversely affected beyond doubt.
Yep.
Whether it's to an acceptable or unacceptable level is what is being discussed.
I'd be happy with the use of those words.
Reflect the intent of Councillor Galt now?
Councillor Galt.
Happy with that, thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to move the motion with the addition of clause 2.
And just before I seek a seconder, Mr. Story, you don't have any concerns about that final part there? That'll work in terms of the administration?
Yes, it will. Of course, these are subjective judgments, which we all need to understand, will have to be made.
All right, so I'll see if there's a seconder.
I wanted to ask a question, but
a very quick question.
Just through you of the CEO, how will this second motion work? Will officers decide if residents are unreasonably affected? If they decide that they are affected in some way, include clauses that are of the view of officers? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, as I mentioned earlier, the officers will need to satisfy themselves that the proposal will not have an unreasonable impact from the point of view of the adjoining residents on the function and operation of the road network, be that traffic or parking. And if they come to the view that it will not, then it will have satisfied that test and the plan can be endorsed. If they reach an alternative view, and that cannot be resolved through discussion with the applicant, then they would need to refuse to endorse the plans, and that may actually result in the matter coming back here for consideration.
I think I need to draw a line there and say, let's then debate it. So is there a seconder? Councillor Stavry, you're seconding?
I am, but I see a problem, particularly when we say regarding vehicular traffic movements. It should be increased vehicular traffic movements, because as it reads, it relates to status quo, potentially.
So, Councillor Galt, are you fine with the word increased being added?
Happy with the addition of that word.
All right, that's the motion. So for the assistance of Councillor Galt, is there opposition to that motion? There is opposition. Councillor Galt. You speak to your motion. Yeah.
Very much indeed.
Whoop. Briefly, if you could.
Live in hope. I have followed this master plan through a number of its stages. I was very pleased to see that many changes were made during the process, taking into account the concerns of adjoining residents and traffic issues on the road. And I believe that the college has been accommodating in adjusting its plans to facilitate the concerns. I also think it's a very, very big campus, and I think it's had the good fortune to be able to make those changes because of the fortunate size of them. So it's a well thought through plan. I think it's well considered, and it considers the surrounding residents. So I would recommend acceptance of the officer's motion with the addition of clause 2 tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Stavrou.
I will reserve my rights. Or can I?
Oh, I'd rather you didn't. It's a bad habit we've got into where it becomes like two rights of reply. So if you wouldn't mind.
That's no problem. There's opposition. That's why I mentioned it. I echo Councillor Gold's words. In addition to obviously being close to my ward, I've taken very active interest in this, spoken to the office at length, and I'm actually very, happy with the way that the school has approached the whole master plan. I think the addition that has been added to the motion might go some way in giving us the information that we may need. Having been driving children in and out from MLC for the past 17 years, I know that the existing problems are there too, so it has to be considered in that light. With that regard, I endorse the motion.
Thank you. Are there other speakers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I'll speak in opposition. Largely, I think the application's 95% correct. I do admire the work that's gone into the master plan and appreciate all the work the officers have had with their assessment of it. But I'm extremely concerned about the impact of what I can estimate as at least 10 residential properties in Strathford Avenue. And at this stage, we haven't been provided any assurance that major construction heavy vehicle access will not be utilising their street. And I'll just comment a little bit further on my concerns. There's a residential property in the Linden ward that I've been elected to represent, a corner site. We're talking one residential property that has an underground basement. And
I'm just sorry, but I'm going to have to steer you back to this matter.
well, it's just relevant to the point that when there's excavation for underground basement, on one site alone, there was over 80 vehicle movements of trucks completely full going to waste, but obviously all the heavy excavation equipment as well. Now, that's just one example of one site. The impost on this street, if the vehicle access was to utilise it, I think would be unfair on the residents for a 2-year period, and that's why I can't support this application unless there could be an amendment to incorporate a willingness to liaise with Vic Roads to access their service road as an alternate route. That's the only way I could support this.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I commend the college for being responsive to many of the concerns raised by the neighbours. However, I am still concerned about the impacts to the neighbourhood, particularly with regard to the maintenance area. And we've seen another large private school in the municipality have ongoing negative interactions with the neighbourhood in relation to their maintenance yard and bay and the heavy vehicles, tractors and bits and pieces coming and going from that area. So I am a little worried about that. I encourage the college to engage further with Vic Roads in consideration of utilising that possible tract of land to avoid conflict with the neighbours, and encourage consideration of 2 lanes of egress there and perhaps a modification of the traffic island to allow the flow of traffic off the college campus. Naturally, if parents are waiting for 4 buses to leave the site and they're queued up behind it, they will be trying to find different places for their drop-off and pick-up in the days thereafter, and that will have flow-on effects into the neighbouring streets and amenity impacts to the neighbours of the campus, and that causes me concern. But I'm happy to support this motion, and I'm satisfied with the inclusion of the second clause. Thank you.
Anyone else before I return to Councillor Galt? Councillor Franco.
I'm a little bit torn on how to approach and vote for this motion. I'm prepared to support point 1 and support the proposal that's before us. I'm a little bit concerned about clause 2, the additional clause, and to the extent that officers have said that our Transport and Traffic Department's okay with it and the Vic Road is okay with it, then I question what is going to transpire. I presume that there'll be no change whatsoever and therefore that it's an innocuous motion, which is going to have no impact. But if officers decide and use their judgment and their discretion to include additional clauses that we may be unaware of, it's an awkward situation as an elected council, as a committee, to make a decision that provides that discretion. So I'm a little bit uneasy with the nature of that clause for those reasons. I mean, it sounds good. They're nice words, that adjoining residents are not unreasonably affected, but what does that mean? And in practice, let's deal with one of the big issues. Are we going to use this to introduce extended clearways in Barkers Road in the afternoon peak? And if that's the real issue, then I don't think we should be using this. It'd be done in that way. It should be a discussion around that specifically. This is a very vague way of dealing with the extension of clearways. So, look, I'm going to flag that I'll vote against it, but understand that if the motion is put as 1 and were it to fail, I'll vote for point 1 with a revised motion.
Thank you. My contribution to the debate is that I'm going to support the motion that's been moved, albeit reluctantly. I personally would have preferred to see it come back in February with the matters raised in paragraph 2 having been dealt with, but I do accept that causes some problems for Xavier, and I think that on balance we can suitably address the concerns that a number of councillors have by mechanism of paragraph 2. So on that basis, I'm going to support the motion. I don't see this as some clandestine way to extend clearways. That's not what it's about. It certainly isn't for me, and I don't think it is for anyone else who's spoken. I think, though, that there are significant issues that will be exacerbated by this development plan as it comes to fruition, and so I see those points raised in paragraph 2 as entirely appropriate. Is there any other speakers before I return to the mover? Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. No real further comments except to say that I have every confidence that the officers will carry out the requirements of assessing the effects on the adjoining owners quite properly. Thank you.
I put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That motion is carried. So that takes us then to item 3.2. Improving the operation of ResCode, and that will be presented by Senior Strategic Planner Michaela Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Victorian Department of Education, Land, Water and Planning has released a discussion paper entitled...
Just need you to bring that mic a little bit closer.
Is that better?
That is.
Sorry
yes,
about
thanks.
that. The Victorian Department of Education, Land, Water and Planning has released a discussion paper entitled Improving the Operation of ResCode. Feedback on this paper is due by the 17th of December 2021. The discussion paper proposes a new assessment process for all residential development applications made under ResCode in Victorian planning schemes. The new model seeks to standardise how assessment provisions work to deliver more consistent, digital-ready assessment provisions, improve processing times, and to improve clarity for all users. It is important to note that no changes are proposed to permit triggers, third-party notice or review rights, nor the quantitative ResCode standards themselves. The existing ResCode framework requires the consideration of a proposal against the relevant objective, standard and decision guidelines before deciding whether an application meets the objectives. Meeting the numerical requirement of the standard is not considered to automatically meet the objective. Under the proposed new performance assessment model, known as a PAM, the existing ResCode objectives will be split into the consideration of performance measures, which are quantitative, and performance criteria, which are qualitative. Critically, the key difference would be that if the performance measure is met, the proposal is deemed to have met the objective and therefore comply. No further consideration could be given to the performance criteria, nor broader policy objectives which are currently able to be considered in decision-making. Officers have reviewed the discussion paper and, while acknowledging the need to improve the operation of assessment provisions, hold a number of concerns with the proposal. Officers consider that the proposal places too much emphasis on standardised numerical measures, while removing Council's ability to undertake a nuanced contextual assessment. The proposal represents a first step to a code-assess model, which could limit Council's ability to assess development proposals against Council's neighbourhood character policy, design response and local context, as well as any other relevant local policy. It is therefore considered that the proposed model is not suitable to apply to all of the current ResCode standards, and particularly those that relate to neighbourhood character. There are also strong concerns about the implementation process, including its timing and the need for further detailed consultation. While the inclusion of the neighbourhood character policy objectives in the relevant residential zone schedule is supported in theory, in practice it is unclear to what extent and how quickly existing local policy can in fact be translated into the new residential zone schedules. Council will need time to undertake further strategic work, likely including a significant planning scheme amendment to update the local neighbourhood character controls in response to these changes. The draft submission at attachment 2 of tonight's report discusses these concerns in greater detail. Officers recommend the submission be endorsed by the committee before being provided to the department for their consideration. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Then I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Stavro.
I have a question.
Too late. Go on.
You're going to hear it anyway. It's a clarifier. So the way that I understand it is that what's proposed here is effectively a scorecard to be able to assess a digital-ready application to assume whether it satisfies the criteria or not, with a bunch of quantitative and qualitative criteria. And there's the issue. Has DEL provided some sort of study to give you a guidance of how efficacious these things are for this particular type of decision? Because this is a broader decision, I guess, science, if you will, where knowledge exists of how these things operate, and you can actually get a study to actually inform us whether they'll be efficacious or not. Have they provided that?
Through yourself, Mr. Chair, it's interesting. A discussion paper has been provided by the Department of Planning, and what the discussion paper does is try to explain how the existing system, which is a performance-based system, is leading to uncertainty. And that's what the argument is that that's leading to uncertainty, and that this new planning assessment model will create greater certainty. The issue that comes with that is it is true that greater certainty can be provided by providing prescriptive requirements, but the whole basis of a performance-based system is to actually ensure that the quality of the outcome is still achieved, and it's a good outcome irrespective of ticking the box. Because a development that ticks the box may not necessarily be a good outcome or a quality outcome. And that was the whole reason for the system going back 15 years when ResCode was developed, was put in place in the way it was. It was about being able to assess a development around a series of criteria and standards that gave some guidance around it. But if the standard didn't meet the criteria around a good outcome, then a judgment could still be made by the planners in relation to that outcome. So that's what the explanation is in the discussion paper around the analysis that's been done to say why this is needed. What it does do is set up potentially a model for future PAMs, planning assessment modules, for other types of planning applications as well. So this is setting a framework that potentially will then be applied to other situations. So shifting the whole system, if you like, to much more of a tick-the-box system than a performance-based system that it is now.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Happy to support officer's recommendation at the appropriate time.
I think that's now, so I'll take that as you moving the motion. And I'm therefore in search of a seconder, and that's Councillor Gillies, to assist. Yes, Councillor.
I was going to suggest the inclusion of a third clause and just that a copy of our submission be provided to the Shadow Minister for Planning, our Upper House member and my good friend David Davis, in addition to anyone else that might be thought worthwhile by officers.
Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to incorporate that into your motion?
Be very happy to incorporate that, thank you.
Perhaps it could be a little broader and cover the members of State Parliament who represent the City of Boroondara.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yes.
And Councillor Gillies is fine with that. To assist Councillor Hollingsworth, is there any opposition? It doesn't appear to be, so Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will speak very briefly. Again, applaud the officers for putting together the 14-page report. And I do like the introduction to the report where it clearly states that what's proposed could result in weakening of the local planning policies and also jeopardise our neighbourhood character, neighbourhood precinct statements. And I'll just touch on a few other points that I've highlighted here. The report clearly articulates there's concerns with building height, with street setbacks, with landscape, with permeability, with overlooking. There's quite a breadth of, let's just say, deficiencies in what's proposed that certainly warrants more clarification. And I commend the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. That takes us then to item 4, general business. There's no general business. Item 5, urgent business. Item 6, confidential business. Then I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.